In the quiet mountain town of Santa Lucia, evenings always arrived gently. The last light of day would slide across the red-tiled roofs. The swallows would circle above the bell tower, and the smell of fresh bread from the bakery on the square would drift through the narrow streets. Old men sat on wooden benches near the church and spoke in low voices. Children ran home before dark. Dogs barked once or twice, then settled. By nightfall, the town became still enough that people could hear the fountain in the plaza from half a street away. Nothing unusual ever happened there. That was one of the reasons Elena Marquez had never left. She was 74 years old. With silver hair she pinned neatly every morning and hands roughened by a lifetime of work. She had lived in the same whitewashed house on the edge of Santa Lucia for more than 50 years. Her husband, Tomas, had built the back garden stone by stone, planting jasmine by the wall and roses along the narrow path. After he died, Elena cared for the garden the way some people care for shrines. She trimmed the vines. She watered the lavender. She swept fallen leaves from the path each evening, even when no one would notice. At the center of that small garden stood a statue of the Virgin Mary. It was not grand. It was not ancient. It was only a simple painted figure of pale stone, a little weathered by rain and sun, standing with hands open and eyes lowered in quiet sorrow. Tomas had bought it decades earlier from a monastery gift shop after the loss of their first child. Elena still remembered the way he had carried it home in both arms, wrapped carefully in blankets as though it were alive. "She brings peace," he had said. And for many years, peace was exactly what the statue seemed to bring. It stood among white roses and lavender, watching over summer evenings and winter rains. On feast days, Elena left candles near its feet. On ordinary days, she passed by it with a watering can or paused on the bench nearby with a cup of tea. Neighborhood children had grown up seeing it there. Some crossed themselves when they passed the garden gate. Others hardly noticed it at all. To the town, it was simply part of Elena's house. To Elena, it had become something quieter and deeper than decoration. It was memory. It was grief that had softened into habit. It was a presence she never tried to explain. Then, in the summer of 2024, her granddaughter came to stay. Sophia was 7 years old and had the sharp eyes of a child who noticed everything adults ignored. She arrived with a yellow suitcase, a backpack decorated with little stars, and a stuffed rabbit with one ear bent lower than the other. Her parents had gone abroad for work for several weeks, and Santa Lucia seemed to her at first like a place from another century. There were no apartment towers, no noisy avenues, no constant traffic. The streets were too quiet. The nights were too dark. The church bells woke her every morning. But she loved the garden immediately. She followed Elena through it on the first day, asking questions about every plant. What was this flower called? Why did the rosemary smell stronger after rain? Why did the old fig tree lean so much to one side? Why did the bees only seem to love certain blossoms? And then she stopped in front of the statue. "Who is she?" Sophia asked. Elena looked toward the pale figure among the roses. "That is the Virgin Mary." Sophia tilted her head. She studied the statue for a long moment in complete silence, which was unusual for her. "She looks sad," the child finally said. Elena smiled faintly. "Maybe she is thinking about the world." Sophia accepted that answer, but from that day on she paid special attention to the statue. She sat near it with her drawing pad. She spoke to it sometimes when she thought Elena was not listening. She placed tiny white petals at its feet as though offering gifts. And more than once Elena noticed her granddaughter looking up at the statue's face with an expression that was not quite fear and not quite wonder. One evening near the end of July, the sky above Santa Lucia turned a deep copper color just before sunset. Warm air moved softly through the garden, stirring the jasmine and carrying the distant sound of the church bell over the rooftops. Elena was inside, slicing tomatoes for dinner, when she realized the garden had become strangely quiet. No humming song from Sophia, no rustle of paper, no chatter, only silence. She stepped out onto the back terrace and saw the girl sitting motionless on the bench facing the statue. "Sophia," Elena called. "What are you doing, Corazon?" The child did not answer at first. Then, without turning around, she said softly, "Why is she crying?" Elena felt a small chill despite the heat. She walked down the path and stopped beside the bench. Sophia was staring directly at the statue's face. "She's not crying," Elena said gently. "It's probably just the light." But Sophia lifted one small hand and pointed. There was water on her face. Elena stepped closer. The statue stood in the fading sunset exactly as it always had. Pale stone, lowered eyes, soft expression. She leaned in and touched one cheek with her fingertips. Dry? Completely dry. See? Elena said softly. Nothing there. Sophia frowned. I saw it. Elena brushed a strand of hair from the girl's forehead. Sometimes evening light plays tricks. The child said nothing more, but as they went inside for dinner, she turned back once, looking over her shoulder toward the statue among the roses. That night, a storm rolled over the mountains. Thunder shook the windows. Rain lashed the town for hours. Water rushed down the stone gutters and splashed against the garden wall. Elena barely slept. Storms always unsettled her now. They made the house feel older, emptier, more aware of time. By dawn the storm had passed. The air smelled washed clean, and the first sunlight broke through a pale layer of cloud above the hills. Elena took her watering can outside to check the garden, expecting snapped stems, fallen petals, and puddles along the path. She moved slowly between the wet rose bushes. Then she stopped. At first, she thought something on the statue's face was only a reflection of morning light. But the closer she came, the clearer it became. Two thin, wet lines ran from the statue's eyes down along its cheeks. They looked exactly like tears. Elena stared for several seconds, not moving at all. The rest of the figure was dry except for the ordinary dampness left by the storm on its shoulders and base. But these two lines seemed different, clearer, narrower, freshly formed. She set the watering can down. Then, almost afraid to touch it, she reached out with trembling fingers and brushed the stone beneath one eye. It was wet, truly wet. Cool moisture clung to her fingertips. Behind her came the soft sound of small footsteps on the garden path. Sophia had followed her outside. The little girl stopped beside the bench and looked up at the statue. For a moment she said nothing. Then, in a voice so quiet Elena almost missed it, she whispered, I told you. Elena did not answer. She could only stare at the pale stone face and the thin shining tracks running down its cheeks while the morning sun rose over the silent town. And somewhere deep inside her, before a single word spread beyond the garden wall, she knew that life in Santa Lucia had just changed. Elena tried to convince herself that what she had seen that morning was nothing unusual. After all, the storm during the night had been strong. Rain had fallen for hours. Water could easily have collected somewhere along the statue's surface and slowly moved downward when the sun rose. Stone was strange sometimes. It held moisture in places you could not see. That was what she told herself. But the image of those two thin lines running down the statue's cheeks stayed in her mind all day. She wiped them away gently with a cloth before breakfast and said nothing more about it to Sophia. The little girl watched her carefully, but did not argue. Children sometimes understood when adults were pretending not to worry. The morning passed quietly. Elena watered the garden. Sophia drew pictures at the small wooden table under the fig tree. The statue stood among the roses as it always had, silent and still. By midday, Elena had almost convinced herself the strange moment had been nothing more than imagination. Then, in the late afternoon, it happened again. Sophia noticed it first. She had been sitting on the garden bench with her stuffed rabbit beside her, watching a butterfly move from one lavender flower to another. Suddenly, she stood up. Abuela, she called softly. Elena looked up from the flower pots she was arranging along the wall. What is it? Sophia pointed. The lady is crying again. Elena felt her stomach tighten. She walked slowly toward the statue, trying to appear calm. But as she came closer, she saw it immediately. Two small droplets were forming beneath the statue's eyes. They clung to the pale stone for a moment, then began moving slowly down the face. Exactly like tears. Elena reached out and touched the stone again. It was wet, yet the rest of the statue was completely dry under the warm summer sun. For several seconds, she said nothing. Behind her, Sophia spoke quietly. She's sad. Elena forced a small smile, though it felt unnatural. It must be the humidity, she said. But the explanation sounded weak even to her own ears. That evening a neighbor stopped by. San Mateo, who lived 2 houses down the street, had come to return a ladder he had borrowed earlier in the week. He was a retired carpenter with thick white eyebrows and a habit of speaking loudly even when there was no reason to. Elena, he called from the gate. Your ladder survived my roof. Elena walked over and opened the garden gate. "I'm glad to hear that," she said with a polite laugh. As they spoke near the wall, Sophia suddenly ran toward them. "Don Mateo," she said excitedly. "Come see." The old man chuckled. "What have you found now?" "The lady," Sophia said. "She's crying again." Mateo raised one eyebrow and followed the girl toward the statue. He expected to see nothing unusual. In a town as small as Santa Lucia, children invented stories every week. But when he reached the flower bed, his expression changed. He leaned forward slowly. The afternoon sunlight fell clearly across the statue's face. And there, beneath the carved stone eyes, were two small shining lines moving downward. Mateo touched the surface with the tip of one finger. He rubbed the moisture between his thumb and forefinger. "It's water," he murmured. Elena nodded. "But it only appears there." The old carpenter stepped back and stared at the statue again. "Well," he said quietly after a moment, "that is something I have never seen before." He crossed himself out of habit. That night Mateo told his wife about what he had seen. His wife told her sister. By morning the story had spread quietly along the narrow streets of Santa Lucia. At first only a few neighbors came to look. Two women from the bakery stopped by after closing the shop. A teenage boy rode past on his bicycle and asked if the rumor was true. Most of them expected to find nothing unusual, but several of them saw the same thing. Small droplets forming beneath the statue's eyes. The reactions were different. Some people grew silent and crossed themselves. Others leaned closer, trying to find cracks in the stone. A few laughed nervously and said it must be condensation. Elena watched them all with growing discomfort. "I don't understand it," she told anyone who asked. "It has never happened before." Sophia remained the calmest person in the garden. She often sat on the bench while visitors came and went, watching the statue with the same quiet curiosity she had shown from the beginning. Sometimes she whispered to it. One afternoon, Elena finally asked her about it. "What do you say to her?" she asked. Sophia shrugged. "Nothing important." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Then why do you talk?" The little girl looked toward the statue. "She listens." "Listens to what?" "To people." Elena felt a small chill run down her spine. Before she could ask anything else, the garden gate creaked open again. Two more neighbors had arrived. They stood quietly near the roses, staring at the pale stone figure while sunlight slowly faded across the valley. And once again, beneath the statue's eyes, the thin shining lines began to form. By the end of that week, nearly everyone in Santa Lucia had heard about the strange tears in Elena Marquez's garden. Most believed there must be a simple explanation, but none of them could explain why the statue cried only on its face. And none of them knew that the story was only beginning. Because soon, someone from outside the town would arrive. And what that visitor would experience in the garden would change everything. By the end of the second week, the story of the crying statue had traveled far beyond the quiet streets of Santa Lucia. At first it had spread only through conversations in the bakery and whispers outside the church after Sunday Mass. But soon someone posted a short video online, just a few seconds showing thin droplets moving slowly down the statue's stone face. Within hours the video had been shared hundreds of times, then thousands. People from nearby villages began driving to Santa Lucia just to see the garden for themselves. The narrow road leading into town, which usually carried only farm trucks and the occasional bus, began filling with unfamiliar cars. Some visitors came quietly and respectfully. Others arrived curious, whispering among themselves as if expecting to uncover a clever trick. Elena never asked anyone to come, and she never charged anyone to enter the garden. "I don't know what it means," she repeated again and again. But the visitors kept arriving. Some prayed. Some stared silently. Some took photographs. A few insisted the entire thing must have a scientific explanation. Yet almost everyone who stayed long enough eventually saw the same thing. Small droplets forming beneath the statue's eyes, then slowly sliding down the pale stone cheeks. One hot afternoon in August, a woman arrived from the city of Córdoba. Her name was Ana Valverde, and she had driven nearly 2 hours to reach Santa Lucia after hearing about the statue on the radio. She was 52 years old and walked slowly with the help of a cane. For nearly 3 years, she had been battling a serious illness that doctors said was becoming more difficult to treat. When her sister heard about the strange statue, she insisted Ana should visit. "Maybe it will give you peace," she had said. Ana did not believe in miracles, but she believed in hope. And sometimes hope was enough reason to travel. When she reached Santa Lucia, the small town was already crowded with visitors. Cars lined the dusty street near Elena's house. People stood near the garden wall, speaking quietly. Anna walked through the open gate with slow, careful steps. The garden was smaller than she expected. Lavender grew along the path. White roses climbed the wall. And in the center of the flower bed stood the statue of the Virgin Mary. The stone figure looked simple and calm, almost ordinary. For a moment, Anna wondered if the entire story had been exaggerated. Then she saw the people standing nearby. No one was speaking. They were all watching the statue. Anna moved closer. Elena stood near the bench, greeting visitors politely, but with visible exhaustion. The attention had clearly begun to weigh on her. When Anna approached the statue, she removed her hat and held it against her chest. For a long moment, she simply looked up at the stone face. Then she slowly knelt. The garden became very quiet. Some visitors stepped closer. Anna closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. No one could hear the words. The only sound was the wind moving softly through the olive branches above the garden wall. Several minutes passed. Then Anna suddenly lifted her head. Her eyes widened. "The tears," she whispered. "They're warm." The people nearby leaned forward. And there, beneath the statue's eyes, two small droplets were forming once again. They moved slowly downward. Anna lifted one trembling hand and gently touched the moisture beneath the statue's cheek. She stared at her fingers. "It's warm," she repeated softly. The words spread through the garden like a ripple across water. Someone pulled out a phone and began recording. Another visitor crossed himself. Elena stood frozen beside the bench, watching the scene unfold. No one spoke for several seconds. The droplets continued to slide down the statue's face. Anna lowered her hand slowly, tears now running down her own cheeks. "I don't know what this means," she said quietly, "but I can feel it." Within hours, the video of that moment appeared online. By the next morning, it had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. The story of the Weeping Virgin of Santa Lucia spread across Spain. Television reporters began calling Elena. Journalists asked permission to film the garden. And people from cities hundreds of kilometers away began planning visits. Santa Lucia, a town where nothing extraordinary had happened for generations, suddenly became the center of a mystery no one could explain. Some believed it was a miracle. Others insisted it had to be an illusion. Scientists began expressing interest in studying the statue. Priests debated its meaning. But inside the garden, among the lavender and roses, the statue continued to cry. Not every hour, not every day, but often enough that hundreds of witnesses now claimed they had seen the tears. And through it all, little Sofia continued sitting quietly on the wooden bench beside the statue. One evening, Elena asked her again about the strange conversations she seemed to have with the stone figure. "What does she say to you?" Elena asked gently. Sofia looked toward the statue glowing softly in the golden light of sunset. The child thought for a moment before answering. "She says people forget things." Elena frowned. "What things?" Sofia turned her head slightly. "How to care about each other." The words lingered in Elena's mind long after the garden emptied that evening. But the most extraordinary moment had not yet happened. Because soon something would occur in that quiet backyard that would leave even the most skeptical visitors completely silent. By early autumn, the small town of Santa Lucia had changed in ways no one could have imagined only a month earlier. The quiet streets that once saw only neighbors walking to the bakery or farmers returning from the fields now filled with unfamiliar faces. Visitors arrived from across Spain and even from other countries after hearing the story on television or seeing videos online. Cars parked along the dusty road outside Elena's house before sunrise. Some people carried flowers. Others brought candles or small wooden crosses. Many simply came hoping to witness the mysterious tears for themselves. The garden that Tomas had once built as a peaceful place had slowly become something like a small pilgrimage site. Elena never asked for this attention. Yet she never refused anyone who wished to enter the garden. "If people come searching for hope," she said quietly, "they should not be turned away." Every day, dozens of strangers stood in silence around the flower bed. Some prayed, some cried. Others stared at the statue carefully, searching for cracks in the stone or hidden pipes that might explain the strange moisture. Scientists eventually arrived as well. A small research team from the University of Madrid asked Elena for permission to examine the statue. They brought special cameras, humidity sensors, and delicate instruments designed to detect hidden water sources inside stone. Elena agreed. I want to understand it too, she told them. For 2 days, the researchers studied the statue carefully. They inspected the surface with magnifying lenses. They measured moisture levels in the surrounding air. They even removed a microscopic sample from the stone to test in a laboratory. But the results left them frustrated. There were no hidden tubes, no internal reservoirs of water, no chemicals or unusual minerals that could create the appearance of tears. The statue appeared completely ordinary. We cannot explain it, one scientist admitted during an interview with reporters waiting outside the garden gate. But that does not mean it is supernatural. His cautious answer satisfied no one. The crowds continued growing. And still, the statue continued to cry. Not constantly. Sometimes days passed without a single drop appearing. Then suddenly, without warning, the small shining lines would form again beneath the stone eyes. Hundreds of people now claimed they had witnessed it. Yet the most remarkable moment occurred on a quiet evening near the end of September. That day had been unusually busy. Nearly 100 visitors had passed through the garden, leaving flowers, candles, and handwritten prayers near the statue. By sunset, the crowd had finally begun to fade. The sky above Santa Lucia glowed deep orange as the sun disappeared behind the hills. Only a few visitors remained. Elena stood near the garden wall, speaking softly with a woman who had traveled from Valencia. Sophia sat on the bench, swinging her feet slowly, watching the statue as she often did. The air was warm and calm. The distant church bell rang across the valley. Then suddenly Sophia stood up. "Abuela," she said quietly. Elena turned. The little girl was staring at the statue again. Several of the remaining visitors noticed and moved closer. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The statue stood peacefully among the roses and lavender. Then someone gasped. 2 clear droplets formed beneath the statue's eyes. The tears began sliding slowly down the pale stone cheeks, just as they had many times before. But this moment felt different. The entire garden seemed to fall silent. Even the wind in the olive branches stopped moving. Sophia stepped closer to the statue. She looked up at the stone face calmly. Then she spoke in a soft voice. "It's okay." Elena frowned slightly. "What do you mean, Corazon?" Sophia did not turn around. "She says people heard her." The visitors exchanged confused glances. Elena walked slowly toward the girl. "Heard what?" she asked gently. Sophia finally turned her head. Her expression was peaceful. "She says people remember now." No one spoke. The last droplet slid slowly down the statue's face. And then something remarkable happened. The tears stopped. Completely. Days passed. Then weeks. Visitors continued arriving, hoping to see the statue cry again. But the stone face remained dry. Scientists returned once more to examine it. They still found nothing unusual. Gradually, the reporters stopped visiting. The crowds became smaller. Eventually, the garden returned to the quiet place it had once been. Yet something had clearly changed. Many people who had visited Santa Lucia said the experience had altered the way they saw the world. Some began helping their neighbors more. Some returned to faith they had abandoned years earlier. Others simply said the strange event reminded them that kindness still mattered. Elena never claimed to know what had truly happened. Whenever someone asked if she believed the tears had been a miracle, she always answered the same way. "I don't know," she would say softly. "But I do know one thing." She would look toward the statue, standing quietly among the roses. For a little while, people stopped and listened. Sophia still spent many evenings sitting beside the statue. Sometimes Elena asked if the lady still spoke to her. The girl would simply smile. "She doesn't need to anymore," Sophia said once. And in the quiet garden of Santa Lucia, where the world had briefly gathered to witness a mystery, the statue of the Virgin Mary stood silently once again. But the story of the summer when it cried never completely disappeared, because hundreds of people had seen the tears, and each of them left that small garden believing something different about hope.